It is 7 o'clock. Great to have your company this morning. An 11th hour intervention, but a Home Secretary determined to press on with her plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda after the first flight taking them there was grounded. So what next in this controversial and very complicated battle of legal wills? I'll be asking the Work and Pension Secretary, Therese Coffey. Also, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, David Lammy. We'll also be getting the view of an international lawyer on whether or not those flights will ever get off the ground. It is Wednesday, 15th of June. Disappointed, but not deterred. The Home Secretary hits back after the first flight to deport asylum seekers to Rwanda is blocked by the European Court of Human Rights.
I'm in the Rwandan capital, Kigali, as the government here says it remains ready to receive deported asylum seekers when they arrive, and it's no punishment to come here.
3D printed guns on Britain's streets. A Sky News investigation into how social media is playing a part in what police warn is an emerging trend. Climate crisis, a warning that almost 200,000 coastal properties in England could be lost to rising seas within 30 years. Cancel flights to avoid chaos, the warning to airlines ahead of our summer holidays. We'll be asking what it means if you're heading away. Hungary for more goals. England suffer their biggest home defeat in almost a century, losing 4-0 in the Nations League. Also ahead on the programme. As Girls Aloud announce plans to raise money for breast cancer research as a tribute to Sarah Harding, we'll be speaking to Kimberly Walsh about her latest project. And a punt in the sun, with temperatures set to rise into the 30s in some parts at the end of the week. Find out how you can make a splash in the hot weather. Morning all. It was the image the Home Secretary certainly did not want to see. The first flight taking asylum seekers to Rwanda, grounded on the tarmac long after its departure time, with no hope of taking off. The European Court of Human Rights blocked the flight at the 11th hour in a move the Home Secretary said surprised her. Well, let's take you through the key developments. The flight, it was supposed to take off from an RAF base in Wiltshire at 10:30 last night, with 7 people on board. But the European Court of Human Rights intervened to block the deportation of an Iraqi man, which has opened the door to legal challenges from the other 6. The Home Office then announced that the flight had been cancelled just less than half an hour before takeoff. And while all of this was happening, Sky News counted around 260 people crossing the channel yesterday, including children and a baby. Well, in response, the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, said this: "I have always said this policy will not be easy to deliver, and am disappointed that legal challenge and last-minute claims have meant today's flight was unable to depart." She continues, "It is very surprising that the European Court of Human Rights has intervened, despite earlier success in our domestic courts." These repeated legal barriers are similar to those we experience with other removals flights, and many of those removed from this flight will be placed on the next. We will not be deterred from doing the right thing and delivering our plans to control our nation's borders. Our legal team are reviewing every decision made on this flight, and preparation for the next flight begins now. The first group of deported asylum seekers was meant to arrive in the Rwandan capital this morning. Let's head to Kigali, where we'll find Sky's Shingi Marariki. Good to see you this morning, Shingi. So, first flight, as many people predicted, remained on the tarmac. The question now is, will the second one make it?
Yeah, and that is a good question, Neil. The Rwandan government have reacted to the news in a really similar fashion to the UK government, saying that they won't be deterred and that they stand ready to receive asylum seekers when they arrive. They would have been arriving here at this hostel, the Hope Guest House, just as we're speaking, potentially, but that's not happening. They were confident here that they would be ready to receive the asylum seekers. All the rooms were made ready and laid out for their arrival. And yesterday we heard from the Rwandan government who were saying that they're ready to welcome people, and they're addressing so many of the questions we had from the human rights concerns around the plan to the condemnation from the Church of England. I asked about the distress that coming here could have caused the people scheduled to be on that flight. And in response, they said to me that it is not a punishment to come here. They still stand ready to receive asylum seekers.
Shingi, many thanks. Well, as you can see, and I'm pleased to say we're joined now by the Work and Pensions Secretary, Therese Coffey.
Good morning.
Lovely to see you this morning. And I understand that Rwanda is away from your brief, which we will be spending a few minutes on, but we must start with Rwanda. I mean, who could have guessed that the first flight to Rwanda would not have taken off? Well, frankly, pretty much everyone, bar the government. So what happens now?
Well, the government was expected a lot of legal challenges, and we went through the British courts, who gave the go-ahead for this flight to happen, despite the challenges that happened. So I think, frankly, the government is disappointed in the decision. I've never known such a quick decision made by somebody, the ECHR, on this, trying to intervene. And I think the public will be surprised that we have European judges overruling British judges. But nevertheless, I know the Home Office is already getting ready for the next flight. And, we will continue to prepare and try and overturn any future legal challenges as well.
Do you think that the amount of money that we will have spent on this flight, a flight which didn't take off, which will undoubtedly run into the six figures, it must run into the six figures, do you still maintain that this was money well spent?
Well, I know that we spend millions of pounds a day on a broken asylum system. What I do know is that the priority for the government is to make sure that safe legal routes are prioritised and that we try and do whatever we can through deterring illegal, unsafe routes, because the only people that profit are the smugglers who, frankly, push people out into boats and don't care if they arrive or not.
So when will we get this next flight? When are we anticipating seeing perhaps a repeat of the scenes we saw yesterday?
Well, it's for the Home Office to focus on their operational matters. I'm not sure it's something I particularly want to broadcast, but nevertheless, preparations are underway, and I'm confident that the Home Secretary, Priti, will be working with her team to take the next steps that are appropriate.
Days or weeks? I mean, you can give us a rough ballpark, surely.
I'm not going to get into operational disclosures.
Just in terms, though, of the embarrassment, and it clearly is an embarrassment for the government. We began the week with 130 packs supposed to be on this flight. We went down to 7, and now no one has been able to leave. Again, I reiterate this point. Given that everyone, apart from the government, could see this coming, do you still maintain that this was value for money?
I do maintain it's value for money, and anything we can do to deter people being put in the hands of people smugglers is efforts that are well deserved in terms of making sure that we try and stop that and get people towards safe legal routes. This is an unsafe thing to be doing, to pushing people out into the Channel. We know that's the case. We know that's the case of traffickers actually in all parts of the world. But nevertheless, this got through British courts through the legal challenges. And as I say, we're surprised and disappointed that the European judges have overturned that.
I mean, is there, you mentioned deterrence. I mean, is there any evidence that this has yet had any kind of deterrent effect? I mean, figures vary. We ourselves counted, and you can see the pictures there, 260 people coming over the Channel yesterday. Will probably have been significantly more than that. Clearly, the prospect of being deported to Rwanda, it's not having a deterrent effect.
Well, I do believe that we will start to see that as flights start to take off. The government is resolved to making sure that we do whatever we can to stop illegal, unsafe routes of immigration into this country, and that's why we'll continue to make every effort we can.
What are the safe routes? Well,
there are a number of safe routes where people, not only through talent, but also through working with UN in different parts of the country.
So that's it. So it's basically unless you can find a UN representative to assist you getting to this country, or you qualify under the points scheme, you can't claim asylum in this country.
Well, the point is that when people do come into the country legally, of course, they can claim asylum when they are...
Again, I'm asking, how do you get into the country legally if you're coming here to seek asylum and you don't have permission to enter?
You'll be aware there are a number of countries that people are already in where they can apply for asylum.
I'm not asking about them, I'm asking about the UK.
And I'm saying to you about in terms of the different things that we have done. Look, we have a track record as a country of offering places of refuge and asylum to people from around the world. We've already undertaken that significantly, most recently with the Afghan resettlement scheme, but also things like with Hong Kong and British nationals overseas there. So there's a number of routes that we have already taken which are safe, legal, and we will continue to stand by that track record, but do whatever we can to deter the unsafe, illegal routes of trying to get into this country.
But still, and again, I hate to labour this point, the majority of people who come across in small boats are successful in their asylum claims here. Under your scheme, anyone who arrives here illegally could risk being sent to Rwanda. I don't know how you square that circle.
Well, because we're trying to stop illegal, unsafe routes. And it is the unsafe routes, the routes that are illegal, and we are having this perfectly sensible partnership with Rwanda. I mean, the Commonwealth heads of government will be meeting there, I think, next week. This is not like it's some country that isn't a modern democracy. This is about a partnership which was established by the Home Secretary, and it's one that we believe is a good way to proceed with this unsafe, illegal routes, people being put at risk in order to get into this country.
I mean, I have heard Rwanda being characterised in this way at the same time until at least very relatively recently, if it's not the case this morning. The FCDO were warning against gay Britons travelling to Rwanda. So I'm not entirely certain that everyone is sanguine with it. But just in terms of how you proceed from all of this, clearly this government has an issue with the European Convention on Human Rights and indeed the European Court on Human Rights. Asked about withdrawing from both, the Prime Minister said it may very well be necessary to change the law. I mean, would you really countenance withdrawing ourselves from the convention that was set up after the atrocities of the Second World War?
Well, I think that we have never put that, as far as I'm aware, in our manifesto, or certainly the 2019
Just the Prime Minister
manifesto.
saying it yesterday.
But I think it's just, as we have done before, where we've gone into court with the ECHR, a number of issues, and judgments have been made in favour of the government. You know, we are a law-abiding government, and I'm absolutely sure that, frankly, we will get to any future discussions about that. But right now, I'm not aware of any decisions or hints even about that. The most important thing is that we tackle this issue right now. We'll go back, I'm sure, to the ECHR to challenge this initial ruling. And because, as I say, British judges have made the decision, said that these flights could go ahead. And I still think that's the best thing that can happen.
See, I could get this government complaining about the European Convention and indeed ECHR oversight of our legal system if this was just a legacy document that we signed up to in 1950. But the fact of the matter is, back when you were drafting the political declaration that sorted out our relationship between the UK and the European Union, you put the Convention on Human Rights at the very heart of it. I mean, here is the political declaration here. On page 2 of it, the future relationship between UK and EU should incorporate the UK's continuing commitment to respect the framework of the European Convention on Human Rights. It goes far further than that. Later on in the document,
so I'm not really sure the point you're making.
Well, the idea
the 2019 manifesto...
The idea that you're maintaining that it is an unforeseen consequence of giving the European Court oversight of our legal system, that the European Court exercises its oversight of our legal system. You signed up to it 3 years ago. In fact, you said it should be under... The rate... Just let me read this. Let me read this. The parties, the UK and the EU, agree that the scale and scope of future arrangements should be underpinned by long-standing commitments to the fundamental rights of individuals, including continued adherence and giving effect to the ECHR. I mean, you can't complain about something you yourself signed up to.
No, I'm not complaining in the slightest. Our own British judges are bound by the Convention on Human Rights. That's why I think we were surprised the ECHR, as I say, the quickest decision I've ever experienced as a minister, made the decision last night
Is the ECHR superior to the UK domestic legal system?
It's a different approach that's taken. That's why my Home Office colleagues, the Home Secretary, will be taking steps to look into the impact of that. Nevertheless, British judges made that decision, made that ruling, and that's why we will be preparing for the next flight. But I think the whole ECHR is just a surprise and a disappointment, as I say.
How could it be a surprise if the ECHR has oversight of our legal system? I just don't get it.
Niall, it's a different situation. It's a specific thing about human rights. It's a surprise at the decision that they reached, and that's why our lawyers in the Home Office will be continuing to work on that. And it's why our Home Office will be continuing to prepare for their next flights.
What level of confidence do you have, then, that the next flight will, unlike yesterday, take off?
I'm highly confident. This decision was made at a rapid pace yesterday, and as a consequence, it's right that the government continues to try and make sure that we deter unsafe, illegal routes of asylum, people trying to enter the country, because the only people that benefit are unscrupulous people traffickers, often trying to put people into modern slavery as well. So there's a number of different things there. But of course, at the same time, we also want to make sure that we continue to focus, and the rest of the government, as we are trying to do today, as we're introducing legislation into Parliament to help us be able to process and make those payments to help nearly 8 million households with the cost of living.
Let's talk indeed about the cost of living. That is on your brief today, and we now have a timetable for the payment of the £650. Just give us a bit of detail on that. When can people expect to get that much-needed assistance?
So in terms of people who will have already had £150, or the majority, I think it's about 80% of households will have already had £150 of council tax rebate. What they'll be seeing through the payments is next month, they'll be getting half of the £650 payment. Those people on benefits. Indeed, although people on tax credits have to wait a little bit longer because we don't want to duplicate payments, and then we'll be making more payments later in the year. So that's people, not only the second half of the £650, but also pensioners will get an extra £300 alongside their winter fuel payment, and people with disabilities will get a £150 payment as well.
Can we talk then just briefly about benefits? And I know that you're up in front of the Work and Pensions Committee next week, but when you're in front of the Liaison Committee, you were asked whether or not this government would look at, some kind of general uplift in terms of benefits, in terms of legacy payments. I mean, you said you'd go away and have a look at it and see if it could be done in a cost-neutral way. Is this something the government is looking at some form of increase to the benefit system before, I think it's April next year, when the next when it would next be looked at?
So I'm looking. I haven't appeared in front of the Liaison Committee, so maybe somebody else has. I mean, we have looked carefully. This is the way, through the legislation we're doing today, to give us the powers to make these payments. We're doing it at pace, so people will get money next month. At the same time, about 70% of working families will benefit from the uplift in the national insurance threshold, which on average I think will save families an extra £350. So I think it's not a case of looking at rates of individual benefits, but by using these interventions for the one-off payments is something that we are mobilising as quickly as we can.
Totally. And I get that there are a lot of other ways in which this government is trying to help. But why is it? We obviously understand that since we lost that £20 uplift to universal credit, in real terms, benefits are at the lowest for some estimate for 30 years. Why is this government so reticent to look at just a general, across-the-board rise to that one universal payment that was meant to simplify the benefit system?
Well, we did do an uplift because I do an uprating. I do an uprating every year. Well, it rose, and we used the inflation rate that was the index we've always used. But of course, my department is really focused as well on those people who can work, to get them into work. And we have seen a record number of people getting into work in the last few months, very high, hundreds of thousands of people. And at the same time, we have 1.3 million vacancies, and we are trying to do what we can to help people get into work, because that is definitely the best way, of course, to boost somebody's income.
We will see you at the Work and Pensions Committee next week, and we'll hopefully see you in the studio soon. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Niall.
Let's have a very quick look at the papers, shall we? Starting with the Metro. Their headline there, Rwandan air farce. I think you can work out the story that they're talking about. Meanwhile, the Daily Mail focuses on how the flight was blocked at the 11th hour by the ECHR. The Times adds to the story. It says that the court's ruling has left Britain on a collision course with European judges. The Guardian describes the decision as throwing the government's plans into chaos. The Telegraph has the blocked flight as their lead as well. They also report a UK government minister telling Scotland's First Minister she may have to wait until 2039 for another independence referendum. Wonder how Ms Sturgeon felt about that one. Rwanda, certainly to feature in PMQs. Boris Johnson and Sir Keir Starmer going head-to-head from midday today. You can, of course, watch that live. Now, almost 200,000 homes are at risk of being lost in the next 30 years because of flooding. Let's speak to our correspondent, Madeleine Radcliffe, who's in one of the coastal regions potentially at risk. Madeleine, I hope you're not standing too close to the edge. Just explain exactly what the issue is where you are.
Good morning. Yes, it might be hard to imagine on a sunny, bright day like this, but towns like Adair, which is where I am on the south coast in England, could be lost, swallowed by the sea, in fact, in 30 years' time. That's the report's warning, that places like this town, Shoreham-on-Sea, that's the clue is in the name, and you can see it really is built at sea level. All that protects it from the waves are this big shingle beach and the groins. And the warning is 200,000 homes and businesses like those here could be lost as sea levels rise. That's a great deal more than previously thought. The real reason is these towns think that up until now the plan has been to hold the line with defences which exist, these big groins on the beach, the banks of sand. That won't work as sea levels rise by up to 35 centimetres by 2050. Now, the report authors say they're not trying to scaremonger, they just want to start a really honest, urgent discussion about how we deal with the challenge of rising sea levels.
Madeline, thanks very much. Absolutely stunning down there. In the United States, more than 10,000 people have been evacuated from Yellowstone National Park because of flooding. Days of rain and rapid snowmelt washed away cabins and knocked out power lines. Dear goodness, look at that. No one was killed or injured. Officials warn, however, the park could stay closed for up to a week. You can certainly understand why. Plenty coming up on the show this morning. I'll be speaking to the travel writer Simon Calder after airline and aviation bodies were questioned by MPs about the travel chaos during the half-term. Running on empty, I'll be speaking to a taxi driver about the impact of skyrocketing fuel prices on the industry, and we'll have the latest petrol price for you at around 9:30.
Yeah, just take me like 1, 2, 3, go.
I'm going to be joined by renowned beatboxer SK Shlomo to talk about a brand new show raising awareness for the fight against suicide. Also making headlines today, women with the so-called Angelina Jolie gene could be closely monitored for their breast cancer risk and potentially avoid drastic surgery, according to research. Experts hope those with the BRCA gene may also be targeted with a drug to slow down the risk of developing cancer. Police in Brazil have arrested a second man in connection with the disappearance of British journalist Dom Phillips and Indigenous expert Bruno Pereira. The men were last seen in the Amazon rainforest in western Brazil 10 days ago. England's footballers suffered their worst home defeat since 1928 after they were thrashed 4-0 by Hungary in the Nations League last night. Gareth Southgate's men were booed off after a second defeat to Hungary in 10 days. Defender John Stones was also sent off. The Three Lions, well, they've not won in 4 games, and they next face Italy and Germany in September before heading to the World Cup in Qatar. Good luck, lads. The warm weather has apparently prompted people working from home to look for mouse jigglers to trick their bosses that they are at their computers. The jigglers, they keep the cursor moving so it makes like the PC is constantly active. More on that story later on. Now, a Sky News investigation has found that 3D printed guns pose a growing danger on British streets. Police have described the threat from homemade weapons as an emerging trend, with their use appearing to be particularly prevalent among far-right groups. Sanya Burgess has this exclusive report on how social media is playing a part.
Designs for this 3D printed gun are easily found online. While recent mass shootings, such as the Uvalde school attack, have reignited debate over gun laws in the US, a mostly American online community has sprung up, making designs and reviewing their creations.
We got a special project. It is the bubble gun.
Sky News found these influencers have thousands of followers on social media, and it can take as little as 3 clicks to go from a site like YouTube to a hosting website to downloading gun files for free. One popular printable firearm, the FGC-9, has more than 70,000 hits on its download page.
So this firearm is an example of the FGC-9. This was recovered in September 2021 from a borough in northeast London.
Since 2018, the Metropolitan Police have recovered 4 partially constructed 3D printed guns, which are illegal in the UK. Sky News has been given exclusive access to the force's work on tackling 3D printed guns, which includes researching and printing their own firearms.
We're training our staff to look out for guns that aren't conventional. It could be brightly coloured, could look like a toy. It's an emerging trend and one that our staff are aware of.
Building one of these firearms in the UK is difficult. They tend to need some metal pieces. A printed version of this Glock would require springs, pins, the barrel, and other metal parts.
It's not so straightforward to 3D print a gun. You need all of the correct components, you need the right designs, you need to assemble it correctly, you need to test it with ammunition, which in the UK is not so easy to come by.
So, do those putting the files online feel responsible for who tries to use them?
We have no interest in controlling any other human beings. That's quite antithetical to our cause. Our only interest is the freedom of human beings to protect themselves.
In response to our story, Twitter said, "Keeping people safe on Twitter is a top priority for us. The accounts Sky News shared have been permanently suspended." Instagram and YouTube have removed accounts which broke their policies which forbid content intended to instruct users on how to construct 3D printed guns. Sanya Burgess, Sky News.
Parts of the UK could experience something of a heat wave this week, with temperatures in some areas expected to reach 34 degrees by Friday. The Met Office, they've issued a level 2 heat health alert for large parts of southern and central England, with a level 1 alert for the north. Keep an eye on your neighbours. Time to have a quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
We're in for a mostly fine few days, turning hotter as well, although there will be outbreaks of rain in the cooler northwest. The southeast, though, could see 34 degrees by Friday. Currently, most places fine and mild, any early fog in the southwest lifting, but guess what? The far north has some patchy rain.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Red light, green light, remember that? Netflix has announced it's bringing its mega hit series Squid Game to life with a new reality competition series. The Korean drama series became the streaming giant's biggest TV show ever last year. Fans will now be able to apply for Squid Game The Challenge, which will see 456 real players enter the game in pursuit of a prize of $4.56 million or £3.7 million. Netflix claims the show will host the largest cast and cash pot prize in reality TV history. I suspect rather more might survive that than the drama. K-pop sensation BTS, no, me neither. They've announced that they're taking a break. The band have announced that they're taking a temporary pause in order to pursue solo projects, of which there'll clearly be quite a few. They're said to be worth $3.5 billion to the South Korean economy every year. However, the news of their break wiped $1.7 billion off the value of their management company. Remarkable. Coming up after the break, with Russian forces now controlling around 80% of the key city of Severodonetsk, we'll be hearing analysis on the situation in Ukraine from the US Army's former special advisor, Mark Voiger. Welcome back. Quick reminder as to our top stories. And the Home Secretary says she's disappointed but not deterred after the first flight to deport asylum seekers to Rwanda is blocked by the European Court of Human Rights. Sky News investigation has found 3D printed guns are posing a growing danger on British streets. And a study has found that 200,000 homes in England could be lost to flooding within the next 30 years. Just under half an hour ago, the Work and Pension Secretary, Therese Coffey, told me the government is preparing to challenge the ruling blocking that first Rwanda deportation flight from taking off.
Well, the government was expected a lot of legal challenges, and we went through the British courts who gave the go-ahead for this flight to happen, despite the challenges that happened. So I think, frankly, the government is disappointed in the decision. I've never known such a quick decision made by somebody, the ECHR, on this, trying to intervene. And I think the public will be surprised that we have European judges overruling British judges. But nevertheless, I know the Home Office is already getting ready for the next flight.
Just in terms, though, of the embarrassment, and it clearly is an embarrassment for the government. We began the week with 130 packs supposed to be on this flight. We went down to 7, and now no one has been able to leave. Again, I reiterate this point. Given that everyone, apart from the government, could see this coming, do you still maintain that this was value for money?
I do maintain it's value for money, and anything we can do to deter people being put in the hands of people smugglers is efforts that are well deserved in terms of making sure that we try and stop that and get people towards safe legal routes.
What level of confidence do you have then that the next flight will, unlike yesterday, take off?
I'm highly confident. This decision was made at a rapid pace yesterday, and as a consequence, it's right that the government continues to try and make sure that we deter unsafe, illegal routes of asylum, people trying to enter the country, because the only people that benefit are unscrupulous people traffickers, often trying to put people into modern slavery as well. So,
our political correspondent, Ali Fortescue, is once again in the studio. And Therese Coffey expressing almost the same level of confidence about the second flight taking off as the Liz Truss did yesterday about the first flight.
Yeah, that's right. I think there have been various moods in the Home Office over the last couple of days. Certainly pessimism 2 days ago. Yesterday, I think there was real optimism that flight was going to go. And as you heard from Therese Coffey, she says that they're getting ready for the next flight. She says she's very confident the next flight will go. But legally, that's going to be challenging, and it could come to a point where we're waiting till July, which I suppose isn't a long way off, when we have this judicial review.
It's the first challenge of the legality of the policy.
Exactly. So that is a moment when this is really going to be sort of scrutinised, and then you might get a sense of whether this will actually get the go-ahead. But I think what was also from her was when you were asking her about the hints yesterday that the Prime Minister could pull the country out of the Convention on Human Rights, which clearly would be a bit significant moment. She said not aware of any decision or hints even about that, but she did say that she thinks it's likely that initial ruling from the ECHR will be challenged.
No hints apart from the Prime Minister saying that he was looking at it. Ali, for now, thanks very much. Well, those asylum seekers who were meant to be flying to the East African country were being held at a detention centre near Heathrow Airport. Mari Aurora is there for us this morning. And Mari, we don't really know, do we, whether or not those individuals who were supposed to be on the flight last night are now back there. But certainly there'll be plenty of others in that building who may well be scheduled to go on the second flight.
Exactly, Neil. We don't know. We do know that those asylum seekers originally on that plane yesterday were here in this immigration centre ahead of their flight from Wiltshire. We don't know if they've been returned here or not, but as you say, it's very, very likely that other asylum seekers in this immigration centre behind me will potentially be lined up for flights to Rwanda. Now, originally there was supposed to be about 130 migrants lined up for that flight set to head off yesterday. That then by the end of yesterday went down to 7, so not the best look for the government, and then eventually to 0. Now, essentially those appeals went to the wire really, really, really close to time of takeoff. Those legal appeals came in. The European Court of Human Rights not convinced that essentially if those asylum seekers were sent to Rwanda and needed to be returned if the policy was found to be unlawful, that would actually happen, and therefore they granted that injunction and the flight was cancelled. So we'll have to wait and see whether those asylum seekers have been returned to this immigration centre or perhaps a different one in another part of the country.
Mari, for now, thank you very much indeed. Well, it was, of course, a last-minute ruling from the European Court of Human Rights that led to last night's flight to Rwanda being cancelled within half an hour of takeoff. But what does the court do, and on what basis? Well, it was set up by the Council of Europe in 1959 to uphold human rights and democracy on the continent, not related to the EU. The court, well, it's made up of 47 elected judges, one from each member state. They judge in cases in relation to the European Convention on Human Rights. The court's judgments are binding, so countries must comply with them. In the UK, the main piece of legislation on human rights is the 1998 Human Rights Act. That means the rights and guarantees from the European Convention apply to UK law. Replacing the HRA was a Conservative manifesto pledge in 2019. Let's speak to someone who knows an awful lot more about these matters than I do, the legal commentator Joshua Rosenberg. Joshua, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Neil.
So what happens next? Walk us through the process. I was speaking to the Work and Pension Secretary, Therese Coffey, this morning, who suggested that they will be making preparations to get a second flight on its way soon. But with this decision from the ECHR, what does it actually mean?
Certainly, the Human Rights Court in Strasbourg has said that the UK government shouldn't do anything until after the domestic proceedings are over. In other words, a challenge scheduled to be heard in the High Court in London next month. And they've said that the UK government should wait until that's over, perhaps until any appeals against that decision are over. And the UK government is signed up to the Human Rights Convention, as you've said, and is respecting that request from the judges at the European Court in Strasbourg. So the question for the government is when it chooses to schedule this flight. If it were to schedule it next week, then obviously it would be in difficulties because this isn't going to be resolved by the courts until next month. But if it is willing to wait until there's at least a decision from the High Court, which I think we would get by the end of July, it could of course be an appeal after that, then perhaps that would be sufficient to comply with the court. It can also go back to the Human Rights Court and ask the court to lift these temporary measures, these interim measures that the court has effectively imposed on the UK government once the matter has been resolved by the courts in London.
On what basis, Joshua, did the ECHR stop this flight, albeit potentially temporarily?
It said it had regard to concerns from the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees that asylum seekers transferred from the UK to Rwanda would not have access to fair and efficient procedures for deciding their refugee status. It also looked at what the High Court said last week. The question was whether Rwanda being a safe inquiry.
Came back straight to my face. Joshua, sorry, we lost you just for a second. So if we can, just to try and pick up again about 2 sentences ago, if you could.
Yes, OK. What the court said last night was it had looked at information from the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees that asylum seekers transferred to Rwanda would not have access to fair and efficient procedures for deciding their refugee status. There was a question raised by the High Court in London as to whether the decision to treat Rwanda as a safe third country was irrational or based on insufficient inquiries. That was something the High Court said gave rise to serious tribal issues, something it wants to resolve. It also took account of the fact that once these asylum seekers are returned to Rwanda, the European Court would have no jurisdiction because, of course, Rwanda is not bound by the European Convention on Human Rights. And in the absence of any legally enforceable mechanism for returning the individual, particular Iraqi who brought this case to the UK, the court decided to grant this interim measure to prevent his removal until the domestic courts, the UK courts, had the opportunity to consider those issues.
Just in terms, though, of what we've been hearing from the government this morning and indeed last night, Priti Patel said that she was disappointed and surprised in the intervention by the ECHR. Disappointed, I can understand. Should she have been desperately surprised, though?
She must have known that the lawyers representing these asylum seekers would go to court. Indeed, the government made it very clear it was expecting legal challenges. She would not have known whether an order would be issued by the High Court, by the Court of Appeal, by the Supreme Court, or indeed by the Human Rights Court. She might have been surprised at how quickly the Human Rights Court was able to hear this, given that the Supreme Court turned down the appeal by these asylum seekers, this one in particular, particular, just before lunch yesterday. But the Human Rights Court, like all courts, will move quickly when it has to. And to be fair to the courts, the deadline was set not by the courts, but by the government. The government announced when this plane was going to take off. The courts knew that they had to move quickly. They were able to move quickly. Courts can move quickly when they need to. We know about delays in the courts, but when it's urgent, they can move quickly. That's what happened. And given that the number of people who were going to be transferred to Rwanda was dwindling yesterday and in the days preceding it, down to a handful, I don't think the government can have been that surprised that in the end there were applications made on behalf of all of them, which were successful.
Joshua Rosenberg, thanks so much for your time. Let's turn to Ukraine now, shall we? The battle for the key eastern city of Severodonetsk raging on. A local official has said that Russian forces now control 80% of the city. President Volodymyr Zelensky has described Ukrainian losses as painful. We're joined now by a regular contributor to the programme, the former special advisor to the US Army in Europe, Mark Voyager. Mark, lovely to see you this morning. Give us your take on what we are seeing in Severodonetsk at the moment. Is it now game over for the Ukrainians in that city?
Morning, and thank you for having me again. The fierce fighting in Severodonetsk clearly demonstrates that the Russian military leadership has is actually determined to capture the city at all costs. Reportedly, there was a June 10th deadline that was set by Putin, and now this date has passed and gone. Obviously, the commander of the Russian forces, General Dvornikov, the so-called Butcher of Syria, has been unable to do it so by that deadline, and therefore the Russians now are doubling down on trying to capture the city. Unfortunately, as you mentioned, most of the city has been destroyed already, and in a way, Severodonetsk is about to repeat the fate of Mariupol, only on a smaller scale. Effectively, any city that resists the Russian advances is razed to the ground. The Russians, as I said, will use any forces that they could muster. They effectively use soldiers as cannon fodder, trying to prevail over the Ukrainian defenders. The Ukrainians cannot afford to lose soldiers and equipment at that rate. And I fear that at some point, in order to evade the so-called encirclement, so that the Russians would capture the Ukrainian forces in a pocket, it happened in 2014, 2015, on two occasions, the Ukrainians might be forced to withdraw to a more defensive positions to the west of the city and hold some of the critical junctions and routes that also defend cities like Kramatorsk, Slavyansk, Bakhmut, and other areas. Effectively, now the Ukrainians are defending on three sides, and it's a really serious situation. The good news is that into the south, in Kherson, the Ukrainian counteroffensive is gaining ground, which shows us that the Russian military cannot sustain two operations at the same time, an offensive and defense. And if you enough military aid, they may be able to turn the tide in some of those areas.
Mark, I suppose then the question is, those countries like the United Kingdom, which are minded to help the Ukrainians in their battle with Russia, what help can they be, particularly in that part of the country where, Severodonetsk, Mariupol, where they are simply razing, square miles of the country completely to the ground?
Yes, this is a fact, unfortunately, but for the Ukrainians to regain their territories, they cannot afford to strike at those territories with Soviet and Russian-made equipment. They need the precision strike capabilities. That is the multiple launch rocket systems, more drones that will allow them to pinpoint where the Russian forces are. I mean, the Ukrainian territory has been sufficiently destroyed as it is. Ukraine cannot afford to actually reconquer those lands by indiscriminate fire the way the Russians are doing, and therefore any additional high-precision weapons, which is exactly what the Ukrainian leadership has requested, must be met with the understanding of this terrible predicament the Ukrainians are fighting on their own territory, having to reclaim important industrial nodes and areas still populated by tens of thousands of Ukrainian citizens, the other caught between the hammer and the anvil. So the West must give more precision strike platforms to the Ukrainians to begin with.
Mark, we will no doubt speak again very, very soon indeed. For now, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.
Now, as airlines are warned to cancel upcoming flights to avoid potential travel chaos this summer, I'll be speaking once again to the Independent's travel editor about the possible impact on passengers. Welcome back. UK airlines have been warned to cancel flights they can't sustain this summer to avoid causing travel chaos. The warning comes after tens of thousands of holidaymakers were affected by delays and cancellations last month, which they blamed on staff shortages. Joining us now, the Independent's travel editor, Simon Calder. Simon, lovely to see you this morning. I unfortunately was unable to watch the committee hearings yesterday, as I was asleep, frankly. So tell us what we heard from the airlines. Was there an awful lot of contrition on display by any chance?
Well, there was, depending which airline you talk to. So TUI, the biggest holiday company in the UK, which obviously also has an airline of its own. You will recall the terrible scenes we saw on Sky News at the start of the end of May bank holiday, with all sorts of people finding out quite often on the plane that their holiday had been cancelled. It was, in the words of the boss of TUI, Dave Burling, he said it was unacceptable. We also heard from British Airways that they are cancelling a lot of flights because they don't have enough resources, but they stopped short of confirming that this was due to the 10,000 or so people they let go during the COVID pandemic. And EasyJet said, well, yeah, we are cancelling some flights, but we're doing our best. What's happened overnight is that the Department for Transport here in central London and the Civil Aviation Authority have written to the airlines with a very stern warning. And a lot of people will be saying, well, thank goodness at last, because this could have been sent, this strongly worded letter from the Director General of Aviation here at the DFT and also the Chief Executive of the CAA. It says we cannot have any more of these unacceptable scenes, and you are going to have to help us, quote, de-risk the summer to make sure that your flying programs are deliverable. Now that
so we've had sorry, Simon. So we've had both. So we've had both the Department for Transport, TUI, and presumably others saying this was unacceptable. I mean, I suppose the question is, was it avoidable? However.
Well, it was, to use that terrible cliche, a perfect storm. Of course, what we have seen is that since the end of the COVID pandemic, the end of the travel restrictions, of course, the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps himself, said, hooray, we can all go on holiday as we used to, which is terrific, except it's not quite true because the airlines, having been crushed by the travel restrictions and the COVID pandemic, clearly were not in sufficient state to run the schedules they had proposed. Now, some of them are doing absolutely fine. There was a big shout out from a lot of people to Ryanair and Jet2, who've been running everything pretty much according to schedule. The odd delay here or there, occasionally a cancellation. But British Airways and EasyJet are cancelling flights in extraordinary numbers. So BA have cancelled more than 100 short-haul European and domestic flights today, but they cancelled those generally 2 or 3 weeks ago and gave people plenty of warning. EasyJet have cancelled over 40 flights to and from Gatwick Airport today, and they quite often only gave people a few days and maybe in some cases a few hours notice. And this letter, Neil, is aimed squarely at EasyJet, the part which says you've got to have a deliverable schedule. And that means if you have an EasyJet booking this summer, you shouldn't be amazed to get an email saying, oh, you were booked on the 9 o'clock to Malaga on the 7th of August. Well, that's now cancelled, but you can go at 7 o'clock in the morning or 1 o'clock in the afternoon. There will be lots of that happening, I understand, over the next few days, possibly the next week. But most people will still be able to get where they need to be. So do not panic. And don't take a refund. They have to offer you an alternative flight, either on their own airline, or if they haven't got space on the day, they have to find you a flight with somebody else.
Simon, fantastic advice as always. Mine is simply go and top your tan up this week, just in case you don't get away. That's what I'm doing after I come off air. Simon Calder, lovely to see you. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Let's quickly, though, take you through the best pictures making the morning's papers. The Times showing us this beautiful shot of that June supermoon, the strawberry moon, as it passed behind Glastonbury Tor on Monday. The Guardian, well, it gives us a few pictures from a French photojournalist who decided to feature one of Senegal's most prized commodities, rams. Here they are posing with their beloved owners. And The Express shows us a wonderful fly past of an RAF Merlin and 2 RAF Wildcats over the National Memorial Arboretum, marking the 40th anniversary of the Falklands conflict. Coming up after the break, the Work and Pensions Secretary told me she's highly confident the next flight to Rwanda will take off. Will it? We'll get reaction from Labour next.